Resource Management course organized by GIAN, BMS College of Engineering. The second session of the day is on national and international perspectives, policies, programs and institutional framework. I once again welcome Dr. C. Tarshika Murthy sir to take over the session.
Thank you. Yeah. We will move our dialogue or discussions to another. Okay, it's okay. Huh? So I'll be talking about policies and programs with the institutional framework, mostly concentrating on international initiatives that have been proposed for several years. I would go through these things in a systematic way to give you a background on how the international community is looking at the water resources management and how the many, particularly countries in Europe and North America and many other countries have adopted this conceptual framework to manage water resources in an integrated fashion. So the first fundamental aspect related to fresh water came about in the Rio summit in South America, the Rio summit. Some of you are probably familiar, where the Agenda 21 specifically dealt with the water and generally stating some of the basic aspects related to water in terms of adequate supplies of water, so good quality are maintained for the entire population of this planet. You know, these are all, as I said before, motherhood statements. Everyone has to make it in the beginning. At the same time, of course, they emphasized on maintaining the preserving the hydrological, biological and chemical functions of the ecosystem, which is essentially means integrating this ecosystem approach in terms of managing the water resources for human needs. So it's a sort of multi-sectoral nature of water resources development in the context of the economic development, as well as of course recognizing the social needs, is an aspect that they dealt in specifically in chapter 18 of Agenda 21. If you know how this Rio summit came about, you know the 1972 Conference on Human Environment that was held in Stockholm was the beginning of recognizing that the environmental issues are of importance and its implications to managing the water started off in 1972, but of course subsequently followed through many other events internationally, and this Agenda 21 on fresh water dealt directly at the Rio summit, which is the second one that was held in South America. Then of course you all know about the millennium, this one, we crossed the millennium about 19 or 20 years ago. As a preamble to this, millennium development goals were initiated by the United Nations, and there are about 17 SDGs. You know, I have only number 7 which pertains to our discussion, but there are 17 other developmental goals which are also related to environment and water resource and all those things. So environmental sustainability, the target to reduce, read specifically there, the target to reduce by half the proportion of people without access to safe drinking water. You saw the statistics that I gave you before. So the Millennium Development Goal said by 2015 we should reduce by half the proportion of people without access to the safe drinking water, at least the basic water requirement of 100 liters or 50 to 100 liters per day. And the second objective was to reduce by half the proportion of people without access to basic sanitation, also by 2015. So these were the broad objectives and goals that were set forth with specific recommendations to member countries to initiate programs to take measures in terms of water resource, providing safe drinking water for reduce at least by half the proportion of people without access to that. Similarly, it applies to the sanitation. And the other thing aspect, which was sort of an initial idea, developmental initial concept that was introduced is all countries will establish a national integrated water resources management plan and water efficiency plans by 2005. So these are broad goals that were agreed by all countries as a contribution to this millennium, crossing of this millennium, and what developmental goals has to be this one. There are 16 of them. I have only picked the one which is very specific for our discussion. So then the international bodies, United Nations International Year of the Freshwater, you have heard of this. United Nations have many of these type of years, Year of the Women. So that particular year was dedicated to the fresh water, and as an objective for the declaring International Year of the Fresh Water, one of the concepts they introduced, which is of course was well known for everybody, is what is known as the effective watershed management. In other words, you try to manage the water in the entire watershed or the basin level, taking into consideration the land and the other biosphere into consideration. To be effective watershed management, governments need to engage all interests that use impact water resources. Water must be managed within the capacity of the individual watersheds, addressing all the activities that affect water supply, water use, water quality, because land use activities of the uplands and upstream of the watershed can affect the ground and surface water quality and quantity downstream. So watershed management is the concept. I think it has not really taken hold in many countries, certainly not taken hold in India, because the way in which the Kaveri water is managed with no regard whatsoever for the watershed, essentially taking the water as the need arises. So then so the concept of whether you call it watershed or the river basin management was something that was very forcefully enunciated or stated by the International Year of the Fresh Water. To be enduringly successful at managing the water at the watershed, however, governments must share responsibility for timely and effective action and watershed stewardship groups, water planning and advisory councils, and with the public at large, with the stakeholders who have a say in how the watershed should be managed, be it all the stakeholders in the watershed, including the farming community, cities which are within the watershed. All aspects of it must be discussed in a watershed. This one. Then I will go through the series of these things for about 10 or 15 minutes. I think then you will get the idea why. Then the UNESCO is another arm of the United Nations, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which is stationed in Paris. And they also, of course, had their own this one in terms of this one. Water is a key foundation whose importance can hardly be overestimated. It is common denominator of the leading global challenges of our time. So again, emphasizing the aspect of energy, food, health, peace and security nexus. Water management can reduce the risk of disasters such as droughts and floods with transboundary river basins and aquifer systems representing almost half the world's population, because these transboundary, they have no geopolitical boundaries for the watershed or the river basin. We have drawn these geopolitical boundaries for political reasons, but the water as a medium, of course, has its own this one. So even similarly for the aquifers, representing almost half the world's population, where water cooperation is vital for world peace. This, of course, as I said, is a very general statement. It specifically impinges on interstate water sharing, or even international sharing of water from one particular basin, of course, which is shared by sometimes two countries, sometimes many countries. We'll see that as we go along in these lectures. Then again, this is one of the sustainable development goals, which actually provided the base for the concept of integrated water resources management. We have not really talked about what this integrated water resources management is. We are using it simply as a phrase, but we will come to that, what it really means, as we go along these lectures. IWRM sharing lessons learned and good practices in improving access to water, sanitation, hygiene, in increasing the water use efficiency, reducing water pollution, protection of water basins and the ecosystems. As you could see in all these international declarations, there is the strong emphasis on this ecosystem approach, not to deal with water per se as a sector, but to deal water within the framework of this ecosystem, meeting not only the human needs, but also the hydrological and other ecosystem needs and functions. So another this one, which again re-emphasizing World Summit on Sustainable Development, which was held in Johannesburg in 2002. These are all international organization conventions that are follows sequentially every 4 to 5 years. So there they essentially pinpointed that the integrated water resources management and water efficiency plans by 2005 with support to developing countries. But they particularly saw that the developing countries are lagging behind this one. Although it was not specifically stated, most of the developed countries, most of Europe, North America, even to some extent some countries in Southeast Asia like Japan, and they already had intuitively developed managing the waters in an integrated way, although it may not have been called IWRM per se, but they have been more following an integrated approach to manage their water resources. So the Global Water Partnership, they came up with this IWRM comb. We will discuss it later on also in detail. Was developed under the following 5 categories: water supply and sanitation, which is of course essentially a municipal drinking water and sanitation function; irrigation and drainage; there's of course the food security; energy resources; environmental services, which is essentially preserving the integrity of the ecosystem. Because by over-exploiting the water resources, you do not sacrifice the integrity of the ecosystem itself. So integrity of the ecosystem is fundamental. That's where the environmental services comes in. Industry and navigation, which is more commercial. Industrial development as well as navigation is an interesting part of this one. So all the categories use the comb are economic functions, as you could really. They have not really mentioned any of the social, aesthetic, religious or indigenous use of water, because there is quite a lot of these type of things creep into the management decisions in various countries, not only in India but also in other countries. For example, in Canada we have this what we call Indian reserves. These are the native Indians who lived in that land for many thousands of years ago, before the British and the Europeans colonized. And their needs of water is far more important, and how they have been practicing their own way of water resources management and use was in contradiction to this highly technological based type of this one. But anyway, these type of issues which are related to the indigenous population or for that matter in our country, rural population, or for that matter, religious issues, they were not specifically included in that, in this declaration. The final one, which also, although it came much earlier in other discussions, is what we call the Dublin Principles. There, of course, they wanted to specifically identify water resources issues in 4 specific categories. As everyone understands, and we have already talked about it in great detail, or at least made statements to that effect, is fresh water is of course finite. There is no more water as it was 2000 years ago on the planet. The amount of water that's fixed. And of course it is distributed sometimes favorably to others not so favorably, both in time as well as in space. So, on this finite and vulnerable resource essential to sustain life, development and environment, and obviously every one of us will agree on that. Water development and management should be based on participatory approach involving users, planners, policymakers, which is essentially involving all the stakeholders who have a particular stake or interest in water development. It's a multi-sectorial, multi-stakeholder this one, at all levels. And the third most important thing which we talked about a little bit in this one is women play a central role in the provision, management and safeguarding of water. This was essentially inserted to emphasize the role of women in rural communities like India, and so they wanted to make sure that this particular gender sensitivity is brought about in the management of the water resources. The most controversial and most important is the number 4, the last one, where they specifically for the first time stated that water has an economic value in all its competing uses and should be recognized as an economic good. Because otherwise historically what we have seen is we simply took the water from the nature. We assumed it is a social good. It is just like you breathe air, we assume that the water is an entitlement and it is a social good and it has no commercial or marketable but having known the implications of this water resources management and the role it plays, because financing of water resource development is as important as everything else, they inserted this one, very controversial. Many objected to it, even now they debate about it, which actually gave rise to this privatization issues of water utilities, which was at a dormant stage at that time, although privatization was used, but still the public ownership was there and the private entities only played in terms of support role. But this water has an economic value in all its competing uses and should be recognized as an economic good, was one of the most controversial decisions that was ever done, which actually led to the escalation of privatization and the bottled water industry in the last 20 or 25 years. So this is the, I hope. So in a nutshell, what are the global implications of this one? To summarize, we know that water is a natural resource upon which all social and economic activities and ecosystems depend, and the multiple aspects and roles of water is crucial to govern effectively. So then the question of this global dynamics and drivers such as issues such as climate change, global trade, foreign investment, which is essentially linked with the to some extent linked with the privatization issues, because most of these privatized companies were all multinationals coming from Europe and North America. So there was a whole series of issues where the economic implications and came into the picture. They were recognized in the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development and the Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which is You know, the climate change debate is going on, but it was recognized there. And the Millennium Development Goals we talked about. And then again, the other conventions such as Ramsar on biodiversity, desertification, and all those issues. But discussion on this water, once the Dublin Principle enunciated that water has an economic value, it became a commercial entity, commercial good. Then the whole question of discussion in forums such as G8, G20, World Economic Forum, World Water Forum, because the water's need and the investment that is required, they're all controlled now by economic instruments, again controlled by these economic summits like the one they hold in Doha, the G8 convention, G20. So the private interests started coming into the picture because investment in water is one of the most lucrative possibilities. So so that's why this privatized water companies like the Suez, the Thames, and Viola, they are all prospering both in terms of privatized water management as well as in the bottled water industry. So the population growth, technology, changing lifestyles, increasing consumption, climate change introduce uncertainty to water management at both social, regional, and global levels. In other words, this sort of laid the foundation internationally, but much of it, as I said, you know, they're all conventional type of statements which all of us know about it, but some of the aspects like the number 4 issue, the Dublin Principle number 4, where water was recognized as economic, this one had a significant impact on in which the way in which the water was managed. We'll discuss that in greater detail in a separate lecture. So I talked about this IWRM management water comb that we talked about. The infrastructure for management of floods, droughts, multipurpose storage, water quality, source water protection. It gives a whole list of activities, policy, institutional framework, management instruments, and the political economy of water and management, essentially overlapping on this intersharing. So there are 4 functions or 5 functions which we have already talked about: water supply and sanitation, which is the municipal sector; irrigation and drainage, essentially agriculture; energy; environmental, which is essentially the ecosystem functions and ecosystem services. The others, of course, is the industrial and navigation, this one. So this was the comb that was brought about. So in a way, essentially what exactly we mean by this one is IWRM, essentially based on what I have already told you in the last hour and a half, is essentially a process that promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize the resultant economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystems. So in a sense, what it conveys is that we cannot deal with water in a sectorial approach, because quite often when you see programs that are at least it doesn't happen in countries where they have already taken the IWRM into picture, but quite often in some of the decisions that come out in India is more sectorial oriented, because the extension of the Kaveri water scheme, the 5th stage, and the proposal to bring water from Godavari to Kaveri through, some of these type of things are simply sectorial approach without paying any attention whatsoever to the effect that it will have on related resources such as land and ecosystem and other services. So this is the whole concept of definition of what exactly Again, it impinges on what I mentioned before, is the concept of river basin or watershed type of management, where you pay attention to every sector that is there in the watershed, and not simply try to develop water per se as a sectoral issue. So this is the governance paradigm for water resources management, which encompasses the principles of sustainable development. Again, there is a lot being said and written and on this sustainable development, characterized by collaborative and stakeholder-driven processes, and an effective approach for reconciling the competing demands with the existing supplies of fresh water. Competing demands means there is demand for agriculture, there is demand for industrial use, demand for energy generation, demand for municipal water systems. So you have to balance this competing demands with the existing supplies of fresh water that is available within the watershed or within the river basin, while at the same time protecting the water quality. That's one thing that we have not been paying very much attention, particularly in this country. We have not paid much attention to the water quality issues. We have been reckless in degrading the water bodies, not realizing the importance of resource that is already in our doorstep. So that's one issue that is important to keep in mind. So one of the goals is to reconcile the economic development and the ecosystem maintenance. In other words, you don't separate it out. You have to make sure. Some of it may probably look very repetitive, but of course, in order to emphasize it, it is important to recognize them. So the economic development is, of course, is a must in terms of poverty evaluation or all this type of this one. We have to have enough. We have to have food security. We have to have enough water for the drinking and sanitation. But at the same time, we cannot ignore what are the ecosystem needs. How we can maintain the ecosystem integrity. So this is a challenge because economic development goals and ecological needs are associated with different temporal scales. Economic development is more or less defined in the time scale of the politicians, 3, 4, 5 years like that, or maybe even longer. Whereas the ecological needs is generally much longer than that, because they have a built-in this one that you need tens, maybe 20, 30, 40 years for ecological needs. So there's this disparity of the temporal scales which has to be handled in developing IWRM plans. For example, if you are trying to develop water resources, use it for some economic developmental goals, which may meet your requirements in the next 2 to 3 or 4, 5, 10 years, but what the complication or implications of which for the ecosystem, which may affect 10, 20 years down the road, is something that we have to this one. I will have examples to show them, even in much larger bodies of water, such as the North American Great Lakes, how this the conflict with the economic development versus the integrity of the water basin itself. So this mismatch of the temporal scales, sometimes also spatial scales, has to be reconciled, because quite often policymakers, they always look at this developmental agenda which has an immediate impact on the population, or for their own political ends. But in the process, you may be compromising the ecological, which have a longer implications for the future generation. So ecosystem goods and services and their evaluation included in the IWRM planning. In other words, when you are planning for IWRM, whether you are a municipal water system or an agricultural this one, or for any other economic developmental activities, you cannot ignore what are the implications of this in the long term for the ecosystem as a whole. So this is a major source of uncertainty, because It is much easier to say that we are going to get another 1000 MLD from Kaveri by whatever engineering skills that we already have developed. It's an altogether entirely different thing to say what happens to Kaveri ecosystem 20, 30 years down the stream. So that is something that is an uncertainty that introduces in planning for this water resources management. So IWRM is to manage water more efficiently and effectively. Again, coordination of policies, institutions, regulatory frameworks, planning operations, maintenance, design standards of numerous agencies, departments responsible for one or more aspects of water-related natural resource management. The water area is scattered across many departments. It is not just in India, all over the world it is the same. So it requires this multi-agency integration and at the same time this multidisciplinary integration. And quite often when trying to do this type of cooperation, multi-agency cooperation is quite difficult because quite often these agencies want to protect their own turf. They don't want to give up their responsibility or their turf. There is no common ground where you can negotiate these things. So this creates a challenging task of integrating the planning within a multi-agency. This one. Water is one of those resource which creates that. So what are the challenges? As our population grows, pressure for municipal, industrial and agricultural uses of water increases, as you have heard time and again. Our water supplies are becoming more and more vulnerable to contamination and overuse. And we already demonstrated that one, water quality issues. Not only we are degrading the available water bodies, both the surface as well as the groundwater, and also there is overuse. In other words, we have not really paid much attention to the conservation issues that's important to minimize the. So a failure in water management can be disastrous. Of course, everyone agrees with that. So the range and diversity of water issues also means that leadership in addressing these issues is diffuse. As I said, it's diffuse. We have Department of Agriculture on one hand, the Energy Department, and all scattered all over this one. And and also there is no centralized action is extremely difficult. Particularly in a federal system. In Canada also we have a federal system. Water is a state subject. They have the responsibility to develop the water. Central government was only in an advisory role and trying to this one. They do not have the mandate to control. So this becomes a centralized action is extremely difficult because you have to coordinate with multi-agency. So if you put this whole thing in a model, you have the society at the apex, then you have the government, then you have the knowledge base, the science and technology and all those type of things. So this governance has to take into all these type of things, of course, not just simply boxes, because each one of them have in society when you are talking about you have the people who want to use water for agriculture, there are the people who want to use it for industrial purposes, there are people who want to use it for drinking. So there is a whole gamut of users in that this one. Government again is this water responsibility is scattered throughout many agencies. Of course, the one unified thing is as scientists and technologists, at least we have one common ground. We say, well, this is the best way to deal and manage this one, that's one, this one. So this interfaces, government science interface, society science interface, government society interface, they all have to work in unison to come up with a plan or a governance plan which is more acceptable, keeping the IWRM goals in mind in terms of maintaining the ecosystem integrity or the ecosystem services and functions. So to look at it in a little bit more detailed, the stakeholders of the this dialogue that takes place in planning this one you have to keep all of them together. The stakeholders, they are important. There is environmental groups, of course, who will be constantly arguing that under no circumstances you should take water from the Western Ghats. That's one point of view. I mean, that's not necessarily the only one that we have to deal with. Then you have the social sector. Then there's, of course, economic issues will come into the picture. And then, of course, the political. So there is public health, gender, all these spaces that is there in this dialogue has to be compromised or at least paid attention to. So then eventually, of course, at the end of the day, you have to find a common solution of various so there's a process, an iterative process which takes a considerable amount of time, but at the same time you will be able to share the experiences of all the groups and to come up with an acceptable plan for a particular problem in IWRM. So this is the type of approach that has been followed at least in the last 10, 15, 20 years, at least to my knowledge, in countries like Canada, Sweden, most of Nordic countries, of course Japan, Singapore, many European countries are following this one. I think there is no possibility for extreme this one, because I often see that the environmental groups are very vocal. They have only one particular viewpoint, and at the same time the policymakers and politicians have their own agenda. So you have to go through this discussion in a way which is compatible to come up with a common ground. So you have to take this one in terms of whatever may be the problem that is defined in planning. When you take a particular case for developing an IWRM planning, you have certain objectives. You have to state that one. These are maybe goals which are set up nationally or state-wise or provincially or even sometimes local. Some developmental objectives of this one has to be this one. Then you have to go through this the process of assessment of the water resources, what exactly it is there, how much water is there, in a sort of taking stock of the quantity side of the issue. Then water resources policy and strategy, you have to so then you come at the end of that one, you'll come to some kind of a plan. Of course, you'll go back to my earlier two diagrams that I showed you. They all play the role here. And then once you come to the plan, then there is an action and implementation goal that you put in. Then the monitoring and evaluation of the progress of this one. So you go through this one. I mean, these type of things are not done in a hurry. These all take long-term plans. With concrete examples, I'll show you in my future lectures. Sometimes they even take as long as 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending upon the scope of the problem that you're dealing with. So that's the type of time scale that may be necessary in order to develop a viable IWRM plan. So quite often what happens is the knowledge, the scientific and technological knowledge is often lost at various levels. It's not really reaches the real people who really manage these things at the local level. They do not get the timely and reliable information, particularly in a format that is meaningful to facilitate the integrated approaches to water resources management. In other words, the knowledge base that all of us generate in universities, in research institutions, has to be somehow channeled, and it's made available to at various levels of the planning, and more particularly so to the local level. These people have access to this information in a fashion which is reliable and useful to them. and empowers them to take part in make the decisions and to hold service providers or the government more accountable to those things. So, in a sense, it should be a knowledge-based IWRM planning. So, some of this, of course, is in some way repetitive. Efforts are not sufficiently integrated within the governments and between different orders of government. We have talked about this one. We already know that water issues are scattered with several government agencies. Even here, just looking at the Bangalore drinking water problem, municipal water system, you have the BWSSB, you have the Karnataka Pollution State Control Board, then you have the BDA, and I don't know what else, then you have the BBMP. So, each one of them have their own this one. So, scattered, and each one of them are, it's a human nature to protect your own turf, defend your rights, so to speak. So, it's very difficult to sufficiently integrate them, and it becomes even more complex in different orders of government in a particularly federal setup such as India or in many other countries. So, when I say federal provincial relations, it's essentially federal state relations on water are characterized by distrust, competing priorities, and there's a lack of recognition of a national approach. Karnataka government, or for that matter Tamil Nadu government, doesn't really look at from a national perspective. If the food grown downstream in Tamil Nadu is used for the entire population in India, Karnataka doesn't see that way. Karnataka says we need more water here. They don't care whether they Tamil Nadu farmers. So, this is a type of lack of recognition for a national approach is persists in all levels. So, that's another bottleneck in developing an integrated water agenda. Knowledge, of course, this is the ability to make decisions is limited by the lack of accessible and policy relevant science and information. This is very much so in this country. There is quite a lot of talented, able scientists and professionals have done marvelous good work, but it doesn't really find its way into the planning process, unfortunately. And that doesn't happen in many countries because we have already spent so much time and effort and money to train these people to gather the information and the knowledge, and if it is not put to use, it is a tragedy in sense, because policy goes on in one direction and the academic and technical people go in another direction. So, policy relevant science and information, although it is available, it is very rarely used. And I must say that with my own experience for the last 30 or 40 years in Canada, every policy that is done is driven by knowledge and science and education. And without that, policies cannot be done, because so that's an integral part of this knowledge transmission to the policy policymakers is very relevant. Data on water quality, again, as I mentioned to you, the information, the database, whether it is in quality or quantity, is also sometimes scattered in different programs and provinces, and it is not nationally comparable, and sometimes they don't even share it. It's almost impossible to access data and information gathered by one agency by another agency, or these conflicts will arise. So, effective incentives at the individual, industrial and municipal levels are not in place in some way to integrate this one. So, failure to account for the costs of providing water to municipalities, industries discourages adequate investment and efficient management. I think these are all the hurdles that one has to face in developing integrated water management plans. Some of this information that I am going to share is essentially in some way is my own experience and involvement in dealing with water resources management plans. As I said, I'm essentially a scientist, work in to generate the knowledge base to manage these type of things. So there is a framework we have to establish in developing IWRM plans and in water management. The first and foremost, of course, we have talked about it, is the human health. Safe drinking water and human health is protected from the water quality related health threats. We have discussed all these things. This is one of the fundamental policy framework that is laid out at least in Canada, and also of course in many Scandinavian countries and Europe. They all have recognized this one. And the equally important is the ecosystem integrity of the health. Aquatic ecosystems and biodiversity are conserved and protected, because there is no point in mismanaging the water at the detriment of the biodiversity of the aquatic environment. Sustainable use and economy. Economic benefits as a result of sustainable and productive use of water resources is important, but we have to use it in a responsible and sustainable way. Hazards and environmental prediction. Health, safety, socioeconomic impacts from floods, droughts and other water related hazards are minimized through prediction and enhanced coping strategies. In essentially what it means is that you prepare IWRM plans to keep in mind there is a resiliency in this plan which can adapt itself to unpredictable events, whether it is natural or man-made. You have a strategy that the plan can incorporate in dealing with these type of unexpected, unpredicted. You learn from experiences. If you have problem with drought and flood, you manage it successfully in one place, you have the knowledge base that you have gathered, what are the, and it of course will be the stepping stone for managing future events of similar type that happens. And then there is the broader, this one is global commitments Canada is one of those countries which is often referred by many in the world is a water solutions country. As I mentioned, that with a population of 30 million people, we have in Great Lakes, North American Great Lakes alone, we have 25% of the known surface water on the earth. And it's an enormous quantity of water. So yet we have a much more robust IWRM type of planning in dealing with water, as I mentioned, not so much from quantity issues, from the point of view of quality. So it's a water solutions country, so Canada plays a lot of, has a lot of commitments in global issues in managing the water. In fact, in terms of the wastewater treatment technologies, Canada is the leading country which has come up with technologies. In fact, the new water technology that is adopted in Singapore is the Canadian technology that was developed about 20 years ago. The membrane reverse osmosis technology. So it has its role in terms of global commitments. So priority areas for national action is all is there in your CD or that you have received. It gives a number of statements enhancing national capacity for a national freshwater strategy. So you know, some of these things we talked about in terms of how you go about. This is number one, responding to impacts of climate change and energy. This is again developing resiliency in the plan itself, which can deal with climate change effects, whether it is preparing for droughts or floods. Believe me or not, Canada is such a huge country. We have droughts in Midwestern, in Alberta and this one. We have droughts there where farmers do go through the same situation as many farmers that go through in India. So preparing for droughts and floods to challenge, to take care of the impacts that may come as a consequence of possible climate change impacts, and appropriate environmental impact and assessment processes in place to deal with the contingencies and environmental issues. Secure safe drinking water, this is one of the most important this one. It is one of the countries, the safe drinking water is something which is often taken for granted in many countries, but it is not particularly so in many countries. You can't just, the public water supply is not safe. I mean, I'm sure in Bangalore, most of us don't drink the water directly from the tap. It is one of those countries, there are a few of them in the world, you can drink the water directly from the public water supply, not being afraid that they are going to be getting sick or some such thing. So safe drinking water is another this one. So protecting the aquatic ecosystems, they mentioned to you the framework to maintain in-stream flow enforcement, aquatic ecosystem, national plan. Another, this one that I mentioned here about the aquatic invasive species. What exactly you mean by that one, quite often people do not pay attention to this. When you try to transfer water from one river basin to another river basin, you are also transferring along with the water species which is alien to the other basin. So these invasive species have a deleterious effect on the basin where you transfer the water. Examples of that are already there in many countries where they have undertaken without proper knowledge that when you have this large scale transfer of water from one river basin to another river basin, along with the water you are also transferring the species which was quite comfortable in that river basin into a basin which is alien. It is impact of aquatic invasive species is an important aspect that one has to recognize when you are thinking in terms of this large scale diversion schemes like interlinking of waters or rivers. In the course of the discussions, I will have opportunity of showing what really happened in many countries where they undertook this large scale transfer of water from one river basin to another river basin and its impact. This again comes into the picture of this time scale. The impact of this aquatic invasive species in the new basin where they were accommodated took 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But the immediate impact of economic development in terms of transferring water from one basin to another basin was immediate in the year or 2 or 3. But they did not take into consideration what negative effects it has caused in the second basin because of this invasive species. So these are some of the issues which one has to keep in mind. Recognize and respect rural communities for their waters. I mean, we talked about it. Promoting culture for water conservation, which is something which is very much promoted now in all countries. Even in Canada, we follow the water conservation measures. You know, all the technological gadgets that have been introduced in terms of storage, minimizing the water use at both not only domestically but also industrial and other. This one, you know about this shower heads for toilet flushing, and there is a whole lot of technological innovations that are available both in the domestic as well as this one for conservation measures. There is a national, most important thing is keeping the public informed, education program for water conservation for the people. You must have the cooperation of the people to implement these type of things. And we will discuss, there are quite a lot of ramifications of this conservation. This one I think we have an opportunity to discuss them in the future lectures. So commitment to reducing water demands in the urban areas, you know, that's of course self-explanatory. Efficiency improvement in other major water use sectors. So preventing interjurisdictional conflicts, you know what I mean by that in terms of sharing of water between locally between one region to another region. interstate, and even sometimes international. And so bulk water exports. Bulk water exports is again linked with this privatization scheme, because bulk water exports is this bottled water industry. They need the water. Okay, that way they can bottle it and then can sell it at 10 times more than what they have invested in. So this bulk water exports is a very important aspect, and that has been to a great extent controlled, so that if you can develop a safe, secured public water system, bottled water, there is no need for bottled water industry to exist. But once there is mistrust in the public water system, the population at large has to depend on something which is more reliable. So bottled water and bulk transfer, preventing bulk water transports and prohibit interbasin diversions is another. Developing appropriate science and technologies. As again I mentioned to you, is you have to have the appropriate knowledge base, and this type of the scientific base and the technological innovations has to come from the academic community, from colleges like BMS and other institutions, where you have to pay attention to these things and think that would give the scientific and technological base in planning this one. So they gives a whole lot of other issues related to aquifers and long-term investment in centering scientific capacity. Canada is a country of 30 million people, and we have 4 research institutes, each one of them employing almost 500 people. Their business is simply working on the various aspects of water, whether it is hydrological, this one, whether it is water quality issues, a whole lot of them. So to have a scientifically informed decision making at the local level is very important. Unless you have that informed decision making based on scientific principles, we will be walking in the dark, making arbitrary decisions which are not really very beneficial. So the next set of this one is there have developed a number of indicators, provide fundamental information. I already talked about one of them, the water footprint I show you. It's they have water quality index. So indicators provide fundamental information, well established and widely used. Data are generally widely available in all countries. Key indicators are well defined and validated, have global coverage, and are linked directly to policy goals. And we are not there in India as far as indices or indicator development, and they are still in a formative stage, and many countries have already developed some of these key indicators following. In a way, these indicators will help in educating the public at large, and also it helps in following the planning itself in terms of water resources projects. So these are some of the UN water development indicators. Though you have to assess the level of the resource. For example, you have trying to develop a water resource, you have to look at the stress, not simply by means of extracting the water, but also stress in all its manifestations, including the ecosystem and the aquatic environment. So index of non-sustainable water use. So there's no point in my reading down, this is all available. I just included it in the sense that these developmental indicators are very valuable for somebody who plans to start developing this one. Impact of sediment trapping by large dams. Quite often when you design a dam in a river basin, you really do not think about the trapping of the sediments by this large dam. I'll just give you an example. Some 30, 40 years ago, Egypt built this big dam, Aswan Dam, across the Nile. You probably all heard of this one, Aswan Dam across the Nile, which white and blue Nile flows from Africa downstream. And the downstream, Egypt built this big Aswan Dam, created a lake which is a man-made lake called Lake Nasser, which is 100 kilometers, extends from Egypt down all the way down to the Sudanese border. The implications of that one, when it was designed to build the dam for multi-purpose agricultural, of course, the Egyptian economy is very much dependent on the Nile Valley, along the Nile River. Otherwise, much of the country is desert. And also, of course, the dam was built for generating power, energy, and then also for drinking water purposes. Very little attention was paid what the impact of this dam is going to be. This dam trapped all the sediments that was coming upstream, and eventually this Nile River, after the Aswan Dam, discharges into Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean fisheries depended on this fertile sediment that was coming continuously from the Nile River. Once you have trapped that sediment behind the dam, the entire Mediterranean fisheries was wiped out. So the consequences of this one in a long term is something that you have to keep in mind. At the time that the Nasser Dam was conceptualized, built, they had a very vague idea of it, but never really realized what the long-term effect is going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road. The entire Mediterranean fisheries along the coast, where this one was completely wiped out because the fisheries did not have the food, because the sediments is the source of food that was available for the. There are a number of examples of that type where implications of this is something that we have to take into. It is one thing to talk about these type of large scale plans, but you have to keep in mind from the experiences others have, what are the implications in terms of the long term implications for the future generation and also for the ecosystem. So water reuse, index pressure, and all those type of things. So state of the resource, you have to. I don't think there was any thinking whatsoever when the Karnataka government decided to bring water from Kaveri, that Kaveri water capacity is also limited. It is not a perennial river. You keep on pumping water from Kaveri to meet the demands of Bangalore and the neighborhood. Now they have realized it, because also, of course, you have obligations to share this water with Tamil Nadu. So you have to look at the water resources renewability, and it's an important part of this one. So these are, again, I said, this compatibility with the temporal, your decision to plan and develop for immediate benefit is now, or maybe for next year or a year later. But the implications of that one in terms of long term is something that we have to keep in mind. So I have listed them: state of the resource, what are the indicators that one has to look into, and then I have the ecosystem, fragmentation and flow regulation of rivers, dissolved nitrogen, this is important part for the protecting the resource, trends in catchment protection, and the freshwater species population trends and index. We often don't think of the freshwater species, particularly the fisheries, and the health issues are given there, disability. So you go through a whole lot of checklists. I'm not trying to say that you have to go through these type of exercise in every, some water resources development may be fairly straightforward. But when you are thinking in terms of large scale, you're transferring water from one basin to another basin, or developing within the watershed itself, what are the implications or ramifications? But there is a body of wealth is available, data is available, experiences is available. You have to have the wisdom and the maturity to make use of it in making decisions of those type. So in order for the integrated water resources management has to function, we need capacity building. Capacity building in the sense people who have the knowledge and experience to deal with it. Of course, that's where all of you come into the picture, because me, you, all of us, capacity building, it is the knowledge base that we develop is the one that has to feed into this type of thing. And this knowledge base may come from various sources. I have given here a schematic diagram, which is fairly this one. So you go through this cycle. You have major agencies. Some, as I said, that the responsibility is scattered around different agencies. You have the federal agencies, provincial or the state agencies. You have the local government, which is essentially regional government or the city-based. This one, water users, industry, recreation, landowners, municipal. There is the non-government and academia. So all these stakeholders all have knowledge. They are also, people have knowledge. I mean, it's not just the academic people only, but everybody has some fundamental understanding of how things has to be done. So you go through this cycle to develop a capacity in the organization where they can deal with this type of planning. It has to be a stakeholder type of responsibility. I will show with some examples in my later lectures how we have succeeded in doing this, and the education and capacity building, not only at the university and the academic level, but also at the public at large, is equally important, and capacity building is essentially defined in that context. The same type of this one that I have given here, knowledge and capacity, the developmental tools and the outcome. So it is at the individual level, what the organizational level, then at the enabling environmental, this one, then the civil society. So everything has to be integrated. You cannot simply assume that I have the authority, I have the responsibility, I will just decide it myself. You know, I know it, not ignoring the input that may enhance the quality of the decision from other groups and other stakeholders. So we talked about this. Management is fundamentally accepted that management, an ecologically practical unit of managing water, the scale at which the cumulative stresses and impacts become evident is at the watershed level or river basin level, from the origin to the end. If it is a river basin, we know that the water, there is an origin for that. For example, Kaveri starts from Kodagu or some area. Eventually, of course, Bay of Bengal is this one. That's the entire basin. So that would be the scale at which the cumulative stresses and impacts can be assessed, whether it happens at upstream or happens at the downstream. In fact, you have to take into consideration what the impact of, for example, if you take in the extreme, if we extract all the Kaveri water for drinking purposes and agricultural purposes, nothing goes into the Bay of Bengal. Hypothetically, I mean, what would be the implications of the oceanic environment, which is deprived of this fresh water, for maintaining its integrity of the oceanic ecosystem? So you have to look at it from that point of view, not from a black box type of thinking, where I have planned it, which meet my needs, and so you have to, I mean, in order to, I mean, I gave you the example of the Nasser Dam, which is a serious blow to the fishing community along the Mediterranean who are deprived of their livelihood because there was no fisheries to so we had to look at from that point of view. So impacts of upstream activities on downstream water users, balance the need for local decision making and the need for consistent approach between localities. So the watershed is an ecologically practical unit, we have to deal with what that in order to develop these. So any planning that you do, even in a sectorial or a segmental way in the watershed, you have to look at the implications of what it would have effect on the watershed and the ecosystem. So finally, to conclude, one successful story, but many of you probably have heard of it, or Singapore is a small city state. After independence in 1960, the city experienced widespread water shortages. They were getting water from Malaysia, and of course there was no integrated fashion they were dealing with this one. There is a lot of demographic expansion, both in terms of industrialization and so they were in a very serious problem as far as water is concerned. One may probably think that the problems of India or other country may be huge, but they turned this whole challenge into an opportunity for this one. So it's a vibrant city in terms of all water resources development, IWRM or water development activities. Everyone looked towards Singapore. National Water Agency was created. The Public Utilities Board essentially turned the inherent economic scarcity, the water scarcity, into an economic growth opportunity, because now water treatment technologies and many companies are of course associated with this one. They invested in modern technologies. I told you they almost 25-30 years ago, they bought this technology from Xenon, a Canadian company which had developed this membrane technology for both for water treatment, and they eventually was able to get this new water treated recycled water. There's a whole history behind it, how they managed this one. Otherwise they were getting 65% of their water was coming from Malaysia, and they had only about 20-30% of the water. So now the new water, 20% of the water demand is met by desalinization. They still have desalinization with only 10% now. By 2060, new water is expected to meet 50% by this wastewater treatment and recycling. Desalinization is 30% of Singapore's water demand. So they are dramatically reducing the reliance of water imported from Malaysia. So you have to, I mean, this is only very simplistic model, because they are only dealing with the municipal drinking water. But IWRM encompasses not just municipal drinking water, but it encompasses the whole gamut. So I just thought that because almost every year they conduct a water forum. All international water companies congregate in Singapore to discuss the latest trends in technologies to treat not only wastewater but also water for drinking purposes. Oh, I think there's time. If you have, we can have some discussion if you. Feel free. I have another half an hour, 45 minutes. I can stay here. I can talk to you.
Any questions?
Maybe it's the time that we should get introduction from all of them, where they are coming from, what their interests are. Huh? That may be better to. Huh?
We'll have an introduction each person by person.
You repeat again?
Should we have an introduction of personally each and every?
Just a brief introduction, their name and what their, where they come from, what their interests are. Maybe students or practicing engineers or whatever. Just briefly, one.
Before we end up the session, we will have an introductory session. So I'll start, and I request the next.
Each one
to
of you
continue.
say where you come from, your name, what are your interests, why are you here, why are you taking this course?
Sir, I'm Srinidhi SU. I'm pursuing my MTech in BMS College of Engineering, first year. And integrated water management, resource management course is one of the important course for us, because when we go for administrative level after our PG, it will be helpful for us to plan out properly and frame for policies as you have told, and also to understand better how we can manage the water policies. So that is why we have taken up the course.
Tell, yeah, Mike. Is it Michael, huh?
Myself, Hidashi from BMS College of Engineering, first year MTech. Myself, Samskriti, and I am pursuing MTech in BMS College.
Yeah, okay, I'll go closer there. Yeah. Huh? Want to give this one?
Mike use ಮಾಡಿ 7 ಅಂತ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
I am Soman Alexi from Africa, in the eastern part of Africa. I am here in India since 2015. I am a researcher scholar. My work is on water resource management by using remote sensing and GIS technology. In my country, we have a big issue on water resource management. In the north part of my country, we have a shortage of water, drinking water and irrigation water. And of course, we have also issue on water, hydropower energy. So I try to use remote sensing and the GIS technology for groundwater and prospects and surface water detection by using remote sensing and technology. So this course, GIAN course, is very interesting to me. That's why I came from Mangalore University to attend this program. And it's very useful, and I think we will keep in touch, of course. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Sneha. I'm from MIT, Manipal. I'm working there as an assistant professor in Department of Civil Engineering. So water resource management and environmental engineering are my area of interest. So I just came.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone present here. I'm Khushbu K. Birawat from Global Academy of Technology. I teach environmental related subjects at Global Academy of Technology to BE Civil Engineering students. My interest here is multifold. Recently, we have got a project from ISRO to work on integrated water resources management in Bangalore, a study we have to do. So I just wanted to understand the perspectives of what is happening in academia, because I don't have much knowledge of completely this subject. Superficially, yes, but I wanted to gain in-depth knowledge, and when we have a research person or a professor from foreign university, we get a worldwide experience, and that's why I've come here to gain what is happening outside India on IRWM, and a perspective of various people who are here. So maybe over 5 years we'll be interacting on these topics and learning from each other. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teja, and I'm working as Assistant Professor in Global Academy of Technology. I've done my MTech in Hydraulics Engineering, and of course, water is always a topic of interest to me. And I think the topic is very important one in the current scenario, because I think depending on the quantity, we are in the safest side to some extent. But the question is how much quality water we are receiving at the end of the day. So, which is the solution is how to manage the water resources properly, and I'm hoping to get more ideas and hints from your presentation. So thank you so much.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Pavitra. I'm first SIM student from the Environment Engineering BMSc, and this integrated course, the water resource management, is a part of my study, that is climatic change. So I'm.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Megha, MTech Environmental Engineering from BMS. I'm doing my MTech here. The subject topic, I felt it is interesting. That's the reason I'm part of the seminar.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Dikshita. I'm studying MTech first year in BMSc. So this is one of my favorite subject. So I felt interesting. I'm attending this.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Ghanshyam Giri. I am pursuing my MTech second year in NI College, Hydraulics branch, and I am looking forward for my PhD in water resources. So I am interested in this.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Spurti. I'm pursuing my MTech in NI College. I'm interested in water management, so that's why I came here to know about the how the water is managed well. So that I came here.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Mahima. I'm a student from National Institute of Engineering, Mysore. I'm pursuing my MTech in hydraulics. My main interest of coming here was to study water resource management in particular. And so, as you said, hydraulic engineers are more concentrating upon quantity and very less upon quality. So I think this is an opportunity for us as hydraulic engineers to concentrate more upon quality and give even importance to quantity. So that's my interest. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Pooja Pandey, and I'm pursuing BA Second Year from University of Allahabad. And water is always a hot topic, and there is a quote that if third war will occur and because of water. So I think that this course will help me in policing, in promoting the administrative policy as well as in social entrepreneurship.
Hello, sir. I'm Asha, Assistant Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, BMSc. I wanted to know the updates and the global scenario of integrated water resource. So I took up this course.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, I'm Kumudha from Instrumentation Department, BMSc. Out of interest, after looking into the word integrated, made me to join this particular course. So I just wanted to explore, being coming from an electronics and instrumentation background, what can I cater to in this particular area? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ram Rohit. I'm from Department of Mechanical Engineering. The two reasons why I just wanted to attend this particular workshop is, one is in terms of common man's point of view. I've just seen a borewell dried out in one of our neighbor's house, and I was wondering that this will definitely happen one day. So I wanted to figure out what are the solutions which I could get from this particular workshop. This is first reason. Second reason is I have a project running just besides the Arabian Sea in South Karnataka. So when you drill, when you try to get the water from the ground level, I'm finding some salt content, and and I just wanted to have some solution before my project is complete. I wanted some fresh water at the same time. So I am just exploring some of the possibilities through this workshop. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself Prakash, faculty in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I'm attending
and just to enhance my knowledge in the water resource management.
Good afternoon, one and all. Myself, Dr. Mayanak, Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, BMS College of Engineering. And to be frank with you, this GIAN program was initiated by me during my tenure as HOD in the year 2017. I requested all my colleagues to apply for this program. But finally, Professor Ramakrishna came forward and applied for this program. And this is the first GIAN program being conducted by the Department of Civil Engineering. This is what I want to announce. And again, I have registered for this program as a participant. And the reasons are many reasons are here. First of all, I want to know what are the cost-effective methods of treatment of wastewater. Why we are not fully utilizing the treated wastewater? What is the problem with this? What kind of technology you have to make use of it for complete treatment and complete disposal, particularly disposal into the water bodies or disposal onto the land, or at least for irrigation purpose, if not for drinking purpose. Where we are failing, what is the problem with us? That's what I want to know for this one. And second thing is effective utilization of our water resources, so that any resource is beneficial for us. Sustainable development concept really looks into this only. Utilization of the resources or judicious use of resources for the development of the future, present and forever. So with this concept in mind, I am attending this program for all the 5 days. Thank you.
Murthy, Assistant Professor, Civil Engineering Department, BMC. I am outskirt of Bangalorean. I have seen in my childhood days a lot of tanks and lakes, and I used to swim. I used to drink the same water even with my cattle and everything. So cattle, animals, myself, everybody using same water, we were very healthy. But now in Bangalore and many places, after treating water also, we are not healthy. So that is one thing. And another thing, as my professor told, judicious and effective use of water is very important. I was always thinking about saving water, but we always speak, we don't do all these things. So how to continue, continuing with the rainwater harvesting, such effective methods, any other methods, very important. It's not perspective of civil engineer. It's very much important, as my other colleague Ahmedabad, she told World War happens due to water only, definitely. And as Professor told in the morning, if you go to the deep of the ocean, you cannot drink the entire water. Though there is lot of water, you cannot drink that water. The same reason applies here in urban scenario. Water will be there, but you cannot use. So day before yesterday, I read the water which is pumped after treating it as acid water or some chemical water, it cannot be used, and the farmers are very much worried. We are speaking, we are reading what initiatives are taken to get rid of all these things, and very important. This has to come to the grassroots level, and we should work for this. Other than profession, this should be taken as a very important thing. I always look into such things with help of Ramakrishna sir, Mayanak sir, Rashmi ma'am. If you help me, definitely I will continue with that movement. Thank you.
Good noon, sir. Myself Chaitra. I am pursuing my second year in MTech Environmental Engineering. The reason why I am here is, till now as I am environmental engineering student, I have just studied about treatment of wastewater, all those things. But I am not concentrated on management of water. Like, I thought it is very interesting, and my interest to learn it. So I am here, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Present over here, Manjunath, Assistant Professor, BMS Evening College of Engineering. It's an interest towards the course, that's why I registered.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chirant Bore. I am Assistant Professor in BMS Evening College. Actually, I have attended the seminar based on water quality. In that seminar, they explained about purely based on water quality, not on management. They said that we are drinking so many brands of water, but most of the waters is having acidity content, which we will not be knowing, and it is not good for health. So I was a little bit afraid of that.
based on the purification, the electrolysis method is a very good method, they say, but it is a very costlier method also to adopt in a vast quantity to implement it in a easily available manner. So for this topic, I am very interested regarding to continue. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Radhika, first year MTech BMS College. So I have took this course, means actually I am very interested in environmental studies. So that's why I took this master degrees.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Priyanka. I'm pursuing MTech second year in BMSC College. So as this subject is new for me because till now I've learned how the water can be treated. So now I'm opting to how it can be managed properly. So for this I'm here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ravina. I'm pursuing my MTech in BMSC College. I just want to have the knowledge what does this integrated water resource management mean and how does it works. I wanted to know that, so I have attended it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afreen Abad from final year MTech, and in my project, the project title is on the Gram Panchayat level, marking all the environmental attributes, and water resource management is one of my attribute which I have to mark using remote sensing and geophysical techniques. That's why I opted for this course.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Archit Tiwari. I'm from Bhilai, Chhattisgarh. I'm pursuing my MTech in CSVTU University in environmental and water resource. I want to gain more knowledge about the water, integrated water resource. That's why I've taken it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gauri MC from second year MTech Environmental Engineering. I was not knowing much about this topic. I wanted to gain knowledge about this. That's why I opted this course.
Good afternoon, all. I am Netravati from second year MTech Environmental Engineering. We had in our academics about water and wastewater management, but this integrated water resource management is a new subject for me. Just to gain some knowledge about this, I opted this course. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amrita. I have completed my master's in environmental engineering and I'm working as a research associate in CDD Society, Bangalore. My company works for water body rejuvenation, on-site sanitation solutions. So I have come here to gain some knowledge on IWRM.
Good afternoon. I'm Lester Castellino, currently working as assistant professor in Sahyadri College of Engineering, Mangalore. The reason why I took up this is because I'm teaching this subject called as water resources management. So since I've not studied this part of the water resources management thing, basically as my friends over here, they said that they've studied the water treatment or wastewater treatment related subjects, but not water resources. So I thought like, okay, let me give a try myself. Like, let me know about the deeper concepts of this integrated water resource management, so I can teach my students well about this topic, so that I can bring the fire in their heart about this water-related issues, which is like quite familiar. They are familiar with it, but they need to know how to manage it. So that's why I took this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself Shashi Kiran. I am research scholar in BMS and faculty RV College of Engineering. The topic is relevant to my research topic, as well as to get the updates for my academic purpose. I chose this lecture, sir.
Good afternoon, all. Myself Lakshmi. I am assistant professor at Christ University, Bangalore. My specialization is structural engineering. The interest to attend this program is not I come from the water resource background. It is an individual responsibility that we have to learn how to manage water resources as at household level also. And as you have rightly pointed out in your key points, that women also have an important role in managing the water resource. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon to everyone. I am Gopal from MNIT Jaipur. I am a PhD third year in position. So present I am working on reservoir operations. Present I came here for know the present current policies. What are the current policies and in India, and as well as what are the current policies in worldwide. So I need to compare Indian current policies and worldwide current policies. So just that's enough.
In the morning, you say that integrated water resource management is also supposed to manage when we have excess of water. So I got idea in my country, or also in the eastern part of Africa, in the tropical country, we have 9 months of rainfall. So we have water, but the main issue is how to manage. So, according to your experience, what can you suggest as how to manage this water? We have 9 months of rainfall, but so this is my question, sir.
Purpose. Should I ask him the purpose?
Huh?
Purpose of water.
You wanted to know? I think you have 9 months of rainfall in South Africa. I mean,
Eastern part, not in South Africa. Eastern part of Africa. We are on 2 degrees.
South.
Yeah. Of equator. We have 9 months of rainfall.
Yeah.
Sometimes 9, 8.
Well, I think each climatic zone is different. For example, we get 12 months of precipitation in Canada. So we have known that this kind of temporal displacement, just like in India or southern latitudes, where monsoon predominates with a focused period, where management becomes much more difficult because of the all the water supply comes from the monsoon period. But in your case, at least you get water for 9 months. It's much easier to manage, a little bit better to manage that way. So the disparity in the time scale or temporal, this one is much more crucial in countries where a specified period is the one where all the rainfall takes place. So it's I mean, I don't know the answer to your question at all. In many parts of the northern latitude in Canada, US, and even in Europe, precipitation is more or less uniform throughout the year. Either you have in the form of snow or rain. So the entire year we have precipitation. So it's managed. I mean, developing, particularly from the point of view of quantity, is relatively straightforward. We know that. But having said that, we also get unprecedented snowfalls or rain over a period of time, which causes other problems, not so much the problems of flooding and those type of issues. Yeah. I don't know whether I answered your question. Maybe you can talk it out later.
Thank you, sir. We have had a good session on national and international perspective, policies, programs, and institutional framework. In fact, we have been talking about interlinking of rivers, but sir's lecture today about animal invasive species gave us a new dimension of problems to look upon. Maybe it might be a project topic for few of us. So tomorrow we'll be here at 10 a.m. and we'll be having a session, first session from 10 a.m. on water resource development and management, conventional versus imaginative approaches by Dr. C. Rajshekar Murthy sir. Second session will be technological innovations, smart solutions to reduce non-revenue water and pricing strategies, again by Rajshekar Murthy sir. And the third session, that is in the afternoon, it will be on artificial intelligence and decision support systems in water resource management by Professor Rashmi Devi ma'am. So right now we have the high tea arranged. We'll disperse for the day and we'll come back again at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Assembly time will be around 9:50. We'll start sharp at 10 a.m. Thank you all.